That needs to be a metric, is like reducing the time you'll have to hate somebody. So it's
Yeah.
like when it's years, it's just so much time to build up hatred. When it's 100 days, you just have less time and then it's over. Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of What Worked. I'm joined today by Rich Lee, founder of New Era ADR. By the way, Rich, it's funny that when I say your business name, our most popular role that we staff is actually account development representative, which is kind of like an SDR. So it's just funny. Every time I say ADR, I can't help but smile. I'm just thinking about that role that we staff. But yours is involving something very different. Ours is more of a business development function. Yours is involving dispute resolution. So
Yep.
different worlds, different worlds. But yeah, I'm very excited to welcome Rich to the pod and jump into it. If you're into talking all things contracts, this is going to be a good one to listen to, which I definitely am. So Rich, as is customary here on What Worked, I always like to have the guests introduce themselves because I'll do definitely a poor man's version. So if you don't mind telling our audience who you are, what you do, who you do it for, and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Tyler. It's great to be here. I would say less so about all things contracts and more so if you're interested in, or ever dealt with all things legal disputes and legal
Yeah.
fights, right?
The after the contracts.
This is why we exist. Yeah. Background on myself, lawyer in a former life, engineer by background, was a lawyer in a law firm, kind of had an unconventional legal career, left the firm after a year, went into basically IP investment banking. So I was brokering a lot of technology transactions, also leading market development in Asia. Um, did that for about 3 or 4 years. But, really kind of, where my interests lie is being close to the tech, building something from nothing. So joined two different tech companies. One was an early stage fintech company, 12-person shop at the time. We built and scaled that over 3.5 years and sold it. And then my previous company was a data science and analytics company, basically AI before what it is today. Joined them early as well. It was, they were about a 30-person shop at the time. We built and scaled that over 6.5 years, raised several rounds of capital. In both companies, my role was general counsel, but then the
Mm,
beauty of working early stage is that you actually work across the business, go to market, product,
without a doubt.
you name it.
Yes.
And that was the fun of it. And that's also where at my previous company, where basically it was AI before what it is today, right? And so that's where I met my co-founders. And for us, what we do today at New Era, because my role, CEO and co-founder, but I started New Era with three other co-founders. Three out of the four of us are ex-lawyers and really wanted to build something to kind of solve something that we all dealt with in our old world, but it's not something that just lawyers feel. It's actually something that all business operators and all businesses experience, right? Which is why the hell do legal disputes take so damn long, and why do they
Mm,
cost so damn much? And more
sure.
importantly, like when you hear the word lawsuit, why do we just automatically assume, right, that it's a 2.5 year long process and like hundreds of thousands and millions in fees, right? That's just the default that we just all assume, right? And you think about that, like that drives all decision making, right? And so if you've ever been, a business operator and you've dealt with an employment suit or a suit by one of your customers, or you wanted to bring a suit against a customer who wasn't paying or whatever, that thought goes through your mind, right? Let's use that employment lawsuit, for example. Your company gets hit with one. And what do we a lot of times do? We just kind of settle it, even if we didn't do anything wrong, right? And you think about that, like the reason we built this is because it's that core kind of dilemma, which is you settled a case and yet you felt like we didn't do anything wrong. Yet to demonstrate that you didn't do anything wrong, it would take you years and a lot of money. And so therefore, you're paying that settlement, not because you did anything wrong, but literally just to avoid the time and the expense to demonstrate that. Right. And vice versa, customers not paying you and you want to go after them because hey, you should be paid what you're owed and what you've earned. And yet a lot of times many companies won't go after that, right? Because again, the time, the cost, and the expense of going after that amount far outweighs, right, the amount you would have collected. But that's backwards. And so for us, our rationale was, well, you know, especially all having been lawyers for, I mean, I've been a lawyer for 17 years, one of my colleagues for over 20, and another one of my colleagues for, right around 15. And the premise being like, we've seen it and we know. And frankly, I think even non lawyers, any business operator knows that like most legal disputes don't need the 2+ years and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees, right? And yet that's kind of all that's available, right? Because of the existing systems that exist, right? So the court system, legacy arbitration systems, that also take just as long, right? And so our premise was, well, why is it that the same system that was being used to for like two companies to fight over who owns self-driving car technology, right? Or for Apple to fight over whether they're infringing on a patent, right, that governs their watches. Like, why is it that that same system that those companies use are the same ones that we have to use when it's just a straightforward employment claim or a customer dispute or a vendor dispute or the 99%, right? And so for us, the why behind New Era was frankly, 99% of legal disputes and legal disagreements don't need that, right? And yet nothing exists to quickly and fairly adjudicate these. And so that's what New Era is we are 100-day arbitrations. We also do mediations. So that means a resolution inside of 100 days, all for one flat fee. That's also unheard of in any legal dispute, right? Having
Sure.
cost certainty, much less time certainty, all taking place on our platform, which kind of facilitates the entire thing. But then even though it's 90% faster and cheaper, same quality people hearing your case, right? And so, the arbitrators, the retired lawyers, the retired judges who are currently doing this on other platforms, they're joining ours too because they really like how we, kind of pursue these disputes and adjudicate these disputes. And so that's what we are, right? And very industry agnostic. We have clients ranging from, banking to finance to staffing companies to sports, you name it.
Can I ask some follow up questions? Because you definitely piqued my interest. It's as
Mhm.
if you were a fly on the wall in a conversation I was literally having yesterday. I grabbed coffee with another staffing agency owner, and we were sort of, bemoaning exactly what you referenced when customers don't pay, and sort of, our experience when we've gone to lawyers. Should we pursue this? Should we not? And basically them saying, hey, if it's not at X threshold, it's really not worth it. Functionally, or to get a little bit here into the weeds for your platform, how does it work in terms of do you need the other party to agree to use this platform? Does it need to be, for example, all of our contracts or our terms and conditions reference, I believe it's like reference, going to arbitration
Mhm.
and the geographic location of arbitration and agreeing on, an arbitrator and, that sort of stuff, right? Standard sort of legal language. How does that work? Do you need the other company, in other words, to agree to use your platform? How does that work?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, right? Because arbitration and mediation, and real quick, arbitration and mediation, the difference is simply arbitration is kind of like more analogous to what you see in court. There's a winner and a loser, both sides putting on their case. The arbitrator acts as the judge. At the end of the arbitration, they say, you win, you lose. And so on mediation is a little different. It's a little squishier, right? In the sense that the mediator's job isn't to call a winner and a loser. It's actually to help talk to both sides and help them come to an agreement. And so we do both. But both of them, yeah, definitely need both sides to agree. The thing is, the beauty of it is in arbitration, the way you get that done, for the most part, is through contracts, right? So you actually already nailed it. So in your contracts, in your terms and conditions, in any contract we've ever signed, there's always a clause that says, if we have a dispute under this agreement, we will resolve
Yep.
it in, the courts in Chicago or this.
Delaware, whatever.
Yep. Or the this arbitration platform or whatever. People
Yep.
will cross out the words, courts or the
Yeah.
arbitration platform and put in New Era ADR. And just by virtue of doing that, that's a binding legal obligation in the future, right? For any dispute to come to New Era. And because all of this is governed under federal law, the Federal Arbitration Act, right? Courts recognize that. And so that's how you get the mutual agreement. But that little simple change, right, is the difference between potentially 12, 18, 36 months versus 100 days.
you of course struck a chord. We're a small business, and so you say hundreds of thousands of in legal fees or millions. I mean, it would essentially kill us. So I totally get that. Another sort of follow up there is what in terms of the business. You mentioned these arbitrators and different folks that would be involved in these disputes are coming to the platform. Is kind of the play here that you are offering some flexibility in terms of now someone who is based in California can sort of sit on one of these. They now have another kind of like almost like it's almost like deal flow, in other words,
Yep.
or opportunity flow. Is that kind of part of it?
100%. And we've
Cool.
actually called that deal flow, right? And it's just kind of adding to their
Yeah.
pipeline. We don't ask for exclusivity, so they can continue to work and take cases from other arbitration platforms. But then we are basically another source. So it's a little bit like a higher end version, but Uber drivers and who also
Yeah.
have the Lyft app, right? And they have
Where
to both turned on.
Yeah, and you're dealing with the I'm trying to remember what they call it. The first thing was sort of the gig economy, right? Which was the Ubers and the Task Rabbits and whatever it is, and then we got into the I think it's like the talent and the intelligence economy, right? And that's the thing is with your platform, it's pretty cool. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like if I was using your platform, I probably want someone who has direct experience with staffing
Yep.
disputes, right? Where they understand a little bit about the nature of the relationship between the staffing company and the customer and all the sort of laws that sort of fall under that and all that. So
Yeah,
very cool.
for
Okay,
sure.
awesome. No, that makes a ton of sense. Also, one other question here to kind of go back. You mentioned joining those companies very early. I think you said there was 12 employees when you joined the one company and there was 30 when at the other one. And you mentioned kind of wearing many hats. Would you agree with this? I have found that in my experience, I think a general counsel usually is kind of like in those companies, oftentimes functions as almost the COO. I don't know if you feel like that's appropriate. Did you find that that was kind of your responsibilities were similar to that of a COO?
A lot of them were, yeah. Fortunately, in both, I had colleagues and counterparts who, you know, we could riff off of, right, and help with the operations. But absolutely,
Very cool. And then how much of those experiences do you feel like gave you, sort of founder to founder question as you've now ventured out to start your own thing? I mean, you joined a company at 12 and at 30. Did that give you some confidence to go out and do your own thing?
for sure, just the confidence knowing that not only have you seen what works, but more importantly, what doesn't. And so then, knowing that then as a co-founder of a company, you can actually kind of set that path now, learn from what didn't work, take what worked, but adapt it to your version of the business. Cause there's never just a cookie cutter recipe, right? Across different types of businesses. But absolutely, right. Having been there early on, and then seeing two companies grow and kind of like played a key role, right, in both of them, definitely add a lot of confidence, to be able to say, like, okay, well, you know what, like we did company of 12 and a company of 30. Why not a company of zero? Right. And
Sure.
let's start from there.
Keep
Yeah.
going lower. What
Yeah.
you reference what didn't work. Can I ask you for a non sort of I don't want you to violate any NDAs or say anything you don't want to, but I'd love to hear an example of something that you observed or you experienced or even a decision that you made that didn't work for those companies.
I think, and I think this is common, right, across a lot of different organizations is, kind of not knowing who you are and not kind of owning it and picking a path, right? Knowing that you might need to deviate and quickly iterate. But a lot of times, if you're kind of a little bit of it's not so much spraying and praying, but it's a little bit of an identity crisis, right? In some organizations, I also work with a lot of early stage startups, right? Whether it's as an advisor or as an investor, and so I've seen it not just
Mhm.
in companies I've been at, but also companies I've worked with, where the best example is I've seen this multiple times where an organization can be part services and part product,
Yeah.
and they want to turn into a product company, but then the services kind of bring in either the revenue early on
Yeah.
or kind of like very more interesting projects, and so you're kind of hanging on to that while then the other part kind of starts to be negatively affected because you're not focused on the product mission. So things like that, right? Where it's like, you know what, just own who you are, know what you are. Going in, of course, be ready to iterate and adjust. And then if there is a path to like an end state of what you want to be, you just still own what you are early on. And then find that path and follow that path to like what that end goal is of like what you want to be. But don't try and do both, and don't try and be something you're not early on. I think in both situations, customers, investors, they kind of see through that.
That resonates a lot. Higher Frame works with, as we were discussing before the podcast started. Yeah, about 70% of our customers are B2B technology companies. And so they're building whatever you want to call it, a platform, an API, a SaaS, whatever it might be. And what we definitely have seen is that friction that is caused when it's you have your kind of professional services arm of the organization. Sometimes I've noticed technology companies are using it for different things. Sometimes they use it as retention. It's like if we can provide this professional services arm, it can actually help the customers to use the platform correctly and therefore will lower churn. In other cases, it's also sometimes it's a revenue generator, it's a profit generator. And then to your point, it's also sometimes been almost like an experiment, kind of like a labs, if you will. For all those things, I find that there's just this natural tension that arises between that and the product builders. Just because to be a great service organization, you kind of need all people to be, sort of rowing in the same direction. There's a lot of support to be successful in services. Services can be a wonderful, business. I'm in a service business. It can be a wonderful business in the sense of you can get to profitability very quickly and with minimal investment. It can be really hard. It can go the other way fast. And so, yeah, I totally get that. And I've seen that tension play out with some of our customers. Everybody
Yep.
wants that tech multiple.
Yep.
So it's the services cash flow versus the tech multiple.
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
so you mentioned this experience you've had. You've done it. I'll say you've done it all, but you've done close to it all. You've been an attorney. You've been an in-house sort of general counsel. I oversee because I'm overseeing sales at Higher Frame and account management. I'm de facto overseeing all contracts, right?
Hmm.
And so something that I could talk a lot about is that process of getting through red lines, getting to signatures, and
Yep.
I've experienced kind of all different types of partners. Sometimes I'm dealing directly with the founder, and we're able to sort of get through it really quickly. In other instances, I'm dealing with some Silicon Valley, I'm sure very expensive, very good firm that sometimes it feels like they're just kind of dragging it out. I am curious what your perspective is on sort of finalizing terms when you're, a vendor working with a customer or whatever, two companies working together. How do you approach those sort of instances? And how does that differ from maybe when you first started?
I learned quickly. So early on, definitely, especially having that lawyer training, right? And I think, especially lawyers, we're trained in law school to identify kind of everything that could possibly go wrong in a situation, right? And I think then a lot of attorneys, unfortunately, don't kind of then take the next step, which is then identifying, well, of all these things, prioritizing and saying, well, these are the things that really matter, and the rest of the stuff, sure, they could be risks, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of like getting the deal done, the relationship at hand, all of those things, we probably don't need to nitpick over these, right? And so early on, definitely, was a little bit of that ilk where you're trying to nitpick every single little thing in a contract, trying to like get your terms and things that you believe should be in there. But really quickly, you realize, especially in early stage companies where right speed is king and you have to close deals, you have to get revenue. You quickly realize both like through that kind of being forced to learn this, as well as just seeing things play out practically. That like at the end of the day, especially when contracting and any deal making, right? There's a few very important things that are worth fighting over, and not really fighting, but really discussing collaboratively. And then a lot of the other stuff is, you know what, can you just live with it?
Sure.
Because the likelihood of something going wrong for that, not big. And if something did go wrong, also probably not a very big thing, right? Versus, oh, like my previous company, we handled a lot of companies' data. Well, certainly then data protection, data security issues, and the liabilities that come from that, something we need to negotiate. But everything else around payment terms, termination rights, and all the little things in there, a lot of that stuff you just kind of learn to deal with. And so you see that over time, and you see that in more experienced business operators, because I've definitely come across some business side folks too, who, they take pride in like reading every word in the contract. And then they kind of take the approach like, all right, I'm going to nail every word. So you see that. And of course, there are lawyers who do that too. The more experienced folks, you can tell, end up just kind of quickly realizing like, okay, here are the things that matter. Here are the other things that don't. So that's my approach, is really hone in on those things, but more importantly, actually starting off at a pretty neutral, mutually beneficial starting point, right? I'm
Sure.
sure,
Totally.
especially you, like us founders, early stage companies, we've probably been handed contracts by bigger companies
Yes.
and just saying like,
Yes.
take it or leave it. And,
Walmart.
yeah, in some of these, you see like everything is heavily one sided, even stuff that frankly doesn't need to be.
Without a
Um,
doubt. Yes.
And so, and to me, that's more of a practical thing, which is this is the start of a relationship. And if this is how
Yeah.
you kind of introduce and the dynamics you start off with, not great. And so, even in my previous companies, all of our contracts, we amended everything, just make everything kind of more mutual, right? And then, certainly, the important things in our forms, we had to make a little more one sided because there were important factors in play. And then when we did negotiate, we were pretty transparent, right? Because
Mhm.
I think that the thing that people never want to hear is like, well, it's because this is how we've always done it. Or,
Oh, and
you
I've got
know,
a one. I'll do you one worse. This is the worst one I ever got. It was a small company. This was a tiny company, like maybe 5 people. And they just told me, they said, "We've got a parent company in Canada, and these are their terms." And I said, "Well, can I talk to somebody up there who would be willing to chat with me about, here's why these terms are in direct conflict with my business, basically." And they said, "Nope, like, you can't talk to them. They won't change. It is what it is. Like you said, take it or leave it." I am a salesperson at heart. I can still remember when I was a quota carrying salesperson. It
yep,
takes a lot for me to leave a deal. It takes a
yep,
ton. And that was an easy decision where I was like, this is going to be bad. Something that you mentioned really struck a chord there is that, and I just kind of referenced it. I loved you mentioned, making things more mutually beneficial. When I enter into discussions with a company, I try to sort of set the tone, set the expectation. I say, listen, I have tried to be very thoughtful about our terms, and I've tried to think about what is really going to make for a great relationship, a great partnership. So we're starting off in a good place. The number one thing for me where I typically see things go wrong is like what I just referenced. When someone is willing to sort of, in my opinion, undermine the core principles of your business because it's important for them to get one of these wins. Or it's like for them, a good deal is one that's very one sided, to which I always explain, if entering into this partnership is going to mean risking my entire business, then the decision is very easy for me. I can't do it. And that's not me trying to play hardball. That's me just being very honest as someone who is an operator of this company, a fiduciary, right, of this
yep,
company. It's my responsibility to not put us into harm's way, and I'd be putting us
yep,
directly into harm's way. So that's a piece that I just don't quite understand, when companies get so hung up on terms that they lose sight of me trying to explain. I'm like, we're a staffing business. You
yeah,
have you have changed the terms to a point where basically it makes my business not a business. I'm
yep,
just providing you with someone that you can just take at any point. It's,
yeah.
kind of odd. So anyway, I can ramble about
I've
this.
seen that. Yeah,
Yeah, I speaking of sales, I do have to ask you, you made reference to this before the recording. You talked about selling one of your biggest deals, and it sounds like you pulled off a reverse sell. Did you
Yeah.
you sold a salesperson that was trying to sell you? I love a good sales story, so
Yep.
please indulge me.
I mean, and a lot of credit to that sales guy. I mean, we're in touch to this day. But yeah, it was a very large company, like kind of one of the biggest, right? And it was a sales guy. We were talking, and essentially, it was a pretty straightforward conversation where I'm like, well, I'm not in a position yet. There's some things that are actually actually holding me back from being able to do anything with you. But I appreciate this. Certainly aware of what you have to offer. Um, and it wasn't even just kind of making stuff up to say anything. Like I legitimately felt that way. But I'm like, I just need a little time. But in the meantime, you know, if you could help me, because my company's so industry agnostic, and I told them exactly what we did, applied it to their different parts of their business. And again, I think that's also what's really cool about New Era is that, like, again, you don't need to be a lawyer. Like, everybody knows legal
No.
disputes suck. Nobody wants to be stuck in the middle of a legal dispute. Nobody
And
wants to be paying money for a legal dispute.
if you've ever sold any sort of enterprise deal of any size, you're going to be, I became familiar with contracts because I was a salesperson and I had to be
Yep.
familiar with them. And so I became very familiar with the legal dispute, section. And I knew for the company that I was at previously, I knew where the lines were. They would say, "Oh yeah, we're okay to move it from Los Angeles to Delaware. We're not okay to remove, mediation, arbitration, whatever it was." And
Yep.
so you kind of get familiar with some of these terms.
Yeah. And so he picked up on it right away, and you can tell when people really get it, because then he had this like visceral reaction because he's seen legal disputes. Anybody who's ever dealt with it, there's almost like this anger thinking about like what you had to do to avoid you know a legal dispute. And so for him, I was like, if you could just find somebody in your legal department, in your giant sprawling legal department I can talk to, that'd be amazing. So we found one person, not a bad conversation, but also clearly like, well, not the right person. I went back to him, didn't think he would keep going. Like, well, it wasn't the right person. What do you think? Do you think you could find another? He did. Long story short, he found, I think, three or four, maybe five people. Because he believed in what we did so much at New Era. This is a New Era client. He believed in what we did so much. He went and found a fifth person in their legal department who like light bulb. And the guy's like, we need to do this because in this portion of the business right now, we need this ASAP. And this could have an immediate impact, not just on cost and time and resources, but actually what was really cool was on customer experience, right? They're individual customers. And then of course, as you can imagine, you've sold some of these big companies, long sales cycle, just going through vendor assessment and everything. But then everything is done. The company's, so far happy. Um, and it all started with the sales guy. And it was great. And we've kind of seen each other, kept in touch. In fact, meeting up with him tomorrow. Um, yeah. So it's become a great relationship.
I imagine you can't say his name, but we love to give shout outs here at Higher Frame. So shout out you, sales guy. You know who you are. You're the man. Rich is going to see you tomorrow, I'm sure, buy you coffee or whatever. That's such a cool story. I do want to say, kind of here in wrapping things up, as again is customary for What Worked guests, I love to ask our guests to shoot a quick, I've been calling it infomercial, but I think promo is a little bit better. And so a quick promo for your business. So if you were to talk directly to a potential customer with that pain point that really matches New Era ADR's platform, what you guys are solving, talk to them. What would you say? Hey, so and so, are you struggling with XYZ? We've got the solution.
I would say if you're any business operator or lawyer who's dealt with those situations I mentioned earlier, right, where either one, you're reluctantly paying a legal settlement, right, even when you had strong arguments and you didn't do something wrong, and you're paying money just to avoid a legal dispute because you're trying to avoid the time and cost, not because you did anything wrong, right? Or if you've walked away from bringing a case, like for example, against a non-paying customer, because again, the time and money of going after that customer just isn't worth it. reach out, right? Because New Era is, a lot of people have actually now said this to us. This is the only place where you can go and have, you know, a fight in 100 days in a legal dispute and maintain that relationship. And I think that's really, really important, right? Because the existing systems, when you're in a fight with someone for a year plus, no matter what, there's just going to be acrimony, and relationships are going to sour, right? But when you get in, you've had the catharsis of presenting your case, and somebody makes a call in 100 days, much less of an opportunity for both sides to actually truly hate each other. And so, win or lose, you've had the catharsis, you maintain your relationship, but you get the amounts that you're owed, or you can actually put on that defense, right? If somebody's accusing you of something, just reach out, because here's the thing. We have a lot of lawyers on the team as part of the founding team. So a lot of times, a lot of our conversations are actually just kind of like brainstorming with organizations about where we make the most impact, right? Which is most of their organization and most of your organization, if I'm talking to the person. Because very rarely, right, are companies dealing with that bet the company, who owns self-driving car technology litigation. It's the everything else. And we're here for all of it.
That's really cool. Gosh, as you were saying that, I was just imagining, just some of those disputes and how, unnecessary they are. And I love your reference. That needs to be a metric, is like reducing the time you'll have to hate somebody. So it's
Yeah.
like when it's years, it's just so much time to build up hatred. When it's 100 days, you just have less time and then it's over.
Yep.
So
Yep.
very cool. Awesome. Well, Rich, thank you so much for being on What Worked. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I'm very excited for what you're doing. It makes sense to me. I consider me one of those sales guys who gets it. Um, I will ask you, is also customary, where do you like to have people find you? Sort of, so like what channels are you actually active on? And you've mentioned, you've got your company. Of course, I'm sure if someone's interested in working with you guys, you'd love to hear from them. But also, you're an investor and also you have a ton of experience. So I'm sure you advise people as well. What do you like people to reach out to you about?
Yeah, certainly about New Era, as you said. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me directly. It's rich.lee, Lee, at neweraadr.com. Of course, look for us on our website. But beyond that, I'm always looking for, interesting deals, interesting companies, whether it's invest in or work with. I mean, it's just, that's what drives me. It's fun kind of, working with other fellow founders, either helping them just kind of iterate on their projects and their companies, or just, frankly, sometimes just commiserating. Having those founder relationships and that founder network is always really important.
Very cool. You heard it here first. You can reach out to Rich on, sounds like LinkedIn or his email directly. We have a lot of salespeople that listen to What Worked, that are kind of either sales execs or quota carrying salespeople. If you, this conversation should be near and dear to your heart, because you're having to go through typically sort of contract red lines, and something that could be great is to bring New Era to your head of legal and
Mhm.
potentially slot that in. When I was a salesperson, I would regularly send my head of legal various gifts from Amazon, like like a pizza, stone, or like whatever it was. Whenever we would close deals, and believe me, it made a difference. Anytime I needed, contract red lines, they magically got bumped to the front of the line. So I'll say this will be another thing that you can send your head of legal that will make them smile, and it'll be good for you because it'll help you close more deals. So there you go. There's my pitch for you guys.
I appreciate that for sure. And when you're talking to your head of legal, a lot of times legal likes to know who else is doing it. So just let them know, right? That we have
Yeah.
some of the biggest banks in the country, some of the biggest entertainment companies in the country, major automakers,
Yeah.
major retailers, all the way to sports teams like the Chicago Cubs, the U.S. Olympic Committee. We're actually Team USA's arbitration provider.
Cool.
So all American athletes actually have their disputes go through us. And so it's a wide range. And so legal typically likes to know other people have vetted it,
Yeah.
and are
Makes
using it.
total
And
sense.
so, let them know that those organizations, plus all of their lawyers at their respective law firms, have
Yeah.
vetted us pretty heavily and then given a big thumbs up.
Without a doubt. Legal and finance, they need to see the social proof. So
Yep.
totally get that. Well, Rich, thank you so much for being on What Worked. We have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Again, this is a call to action for our audience, for Rich, you as well. If you do know anybody that you think would be a good guest on What Worked, and if you've had a good experience, would greatly appreciate any referrals. We love to hear from very interesting people like yourself. And yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks so much, Tyler.
Thank you.